the Titanic Disaster. On April 10, 1912, the RMS Titanic left Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage to New York City. The ship was 882 feet long and weighed 46,328 tons. Over 2,200 passengers and crew were on board. First-class cabins had private parlors and marble bathrooms. The Titanic was called unsinkable. Captain Edward Smith commanded the vessel. The weather was perfect. Calm seas stretched in every direction. By April 14th, the ship was 4 days into its journey. That evening, passengers dined in the Grand Saloon. Women wore their finest gowns. Men smoked cigars. Below deck, third-class passengers sang and danced. Nobody suspected this would be their last normal evening. The wireless operators received ice warnings throughout the day, but Captain Smith maintained full speed at 25 miles per hour. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times. "Iceberg, right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch ordered the engines reversed, and the ship turned hard to port. The Titanic needed half a mile to turn. The iceberg was only about 1,312 to 1,640 feet ahead. Time slowed. The massive ship began turning, but not fast enough. The ship's starboard side scraped along the iceberg. Passengers in first class felt only a slight shudder. Some went on deck and picked up chunks of ice, laughing and throwing them at each other. They had no idea what was happening below. Below the waterline, the iceberg tore open at least 5 watertight compartments. Titanic could survive 4, but not 5. The captain ordered the lifeboats uncovered. There were only 20 boats. Together, they could hold 1,178 people. Over 2,200 were aboard. At first, passengers refused to get in. The lifeboats looked tiny, hanging 70 feet above the dark ocean. By 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat left. Over 1,500 people remained on board. The stern rose higher. People clung to rails. Some jumped into the water. Others prayed on deck. At 2:18 a.m., the lights went out. The ship broke in half, and the bow section sank immediately and slipped beneath the surface. Hundreds were thrown into the water. Within 15 minutes, the screaming stopped. Silence fell over the water. The Carpathia arrived at 3:30 a.m. and rescued about 705 survivors. Over 1,500 people died from hypothermia. More than a century later, the Titanic still stands as one of the most haunting tragedies in history. Its story has been told in countless books, documentaries, and films. The disaster led to sweeping changes in maritime safety, from lifeboat regulations to continuous radio watches. The ship may rest at the bottom of the Atlantic, but its story lives on, etched into history, and remembered by every generation that speaks its name. The Estonia Incident. On September 27, 1994, the MS Estonia left Tallinn, Estonia for Stockholm, Sweden. The ferry was 515 feet long and carried 989 people. Most were Swedish and Estonian passengers heading home. It was supposed to be a routine overnight crossing. Passengers settled into their cabins around 7 p.m. The ship had restaurants, a bar, and a disco. People ate dinner, danced, and played cards. It felt like any other night. The Baltic Sea was rough that night. Waves reached 13 to 20 feet. Wind speeds hit 56 miles per hour. The ship had been listing slightly to starboard all day because of poor cargo distribution. A few crew members noticed, but none of them reported it. Around midnight, when most passengers went to bed, something happened. The crew members heard loud metallic bangs from the bow. The ship's bow visor had broken loose. Water flooded in fast. The ship listed to starboard within minutes. Passengers woke up to their cabins tilting at impossible angles. Furniture slid across floors. People fell out of their beds onto walls that had become floors. The ship's intercom system failed. They opened their cabin doors and found corridors tilted at 30 degrees. Water was climbing the stairwells. People tried climbing upward, but the angle kept increasing. The ship was rolling onto its side. Those in interior cabins had no windows. They climbed in complete darkness. On deck, crew members tried launching lifeboats, but the list was too severe. Lifeboats on the high side couldn't reach the water. Those on the low side were already submerged. The Estonia capsized in less than 30 minutes. Most passengers never made it out of their cabins. They were trapped in corridors as water flooded in. Some drowned in their beds. Others were crushed by furniture sliding across the tilting ship. On September 28, 1994, at 1:50 a.m., the Estonia was on its side. Then, the entire ship sank to a depth of about 240 to 280 feet. Rescue ships arrived hours later. Out of 989 people on board, only 137 survived. 852 people died, most of them trapped inside the ship as it rolled over and sank. The Concordia Tragedy. On January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia left Civitavecchia, Italy at 7:18 p.m. with 4,252 people on board. The cruise ship was 952 feet long and weighed 114,500 tons. Captain Francesco Schettino decided to perform a sail-by salute near Isola del Giglio. This involved steering close to shore so islanders could see the lit-up vessel. He had done it before. It always impressed passengers. Around 9:30 p.m., passengers were in theaters watching shows. Others were at bars having drinks. Some were getting ready for bed. Everything felt normal. Schettino ordered the ship to sail within 500 feet of Giglio's coast. The ship was moving at 18 miles per hour. At 9:45 p.m., the ship struck a rock formation. The rock tore a 174-foot gash along the port side. The impact threw people off their feet. At first, crew members told passengers everything was fine. They said it was just an electrical problem. People wanted to believe them, but the ship was starting to tilt. Water was flooding into the lower decks. Power systems began failing. The ship started listing to port. Passengers noticed floors tilting. Walking became difficult. People grabbed railings to stay upright. At around 10:50 p.m., Schettino finally ordered the ship to be abandoned. But the ship was already listing 20 degrees. The ship's announcement system kept malfunctioning. Many passengers didn't know where to go. Some crew members helped people evacuate. Others panicked and ran for the exits themselves. But the captain, he was nowhere to be found. It appears that he had already left the ship. The ship continued tilting. It eventually rolled onto its side in about 66 feet of water. People were trapped in corridors. Some fell down stairwells. Some jumped into the sea. Others climbed across the exposed hull, which was slippery and cold. By morning, the Costa Concordia was completely on its side, half submerged near Giglio Island. 32 people lost their lives in the disaster. The Eastland Disaster. On July 24, 1915, over 7,000 Western Electric Company employees gathered at the Chicago River docks. The company had organized a day trip to a picnic in Michigan City, Indiana. The SS Eastland was docked at the Clark Street Bridge. The ship was 269 feet long and designed to carry 2,500 passengers. That morning, over 2,500 people crowded onto the ship. Whole families were dressed in their best clothes. Children ran around excited. Mothers carried picnic baskets. Everyone was looking forward to the day ahead. The Eastland had a reputation for instability. It tended to list from side to side when passengers moved around. Around 6:30 a.m., passengers began boarding. Many went to the upper decks for better views. Others stayed below to avoid the morning sun. As more people boarded, the ship started tilting to port. Crew members tried moving passengers to the starboard side to balance the weight. The ship leveled out briefly. More passengers kept boarding. The crew closed the gangway. They were ready to depart. At 7:30 a.m., the ship suddenly lurched to port. Passengers stumbled and grabbed rails. The ship tilted further. People started screaming. They ran toward the starboard side trying to balance the weight. It was too late. In less than a minute, the Eastland capsized completely. It rolled onto its side right at the dock. The ship was in only 20 feet of water. Hundreds of passengers were thrown into the river. Others were trapped inside. The ship had rolled so fast that people below deck had no time to escape. Water flooded through open portholes and doors. Passengers trapped inside, drowned in darkness. Families were crushed together in stairwells. Rescue workers arrived within minutes. They were right at the dock. They could see people trapped through portholes, hands pressed against the glass, faces looking out. Then nothing. Divers found bodies wedged in corridors. 844 people died. They drowned just feet from shore while thousands watched helplessly from the dock. The Gustloff Tragedy. On January 30th, 1945, the MV Wilhelm Gustloff sat in the port of Gotenhofen in occupied Poland. The German liner was 684 feet long. It had been converted for evacuation. The Soviet army was advancing. Thousands of civilians and soldiers needed to escape before they arrived. The ship was designed to carry roughly 1,800 passengers. That day, over 10,000 people crowded aboard. Refugees filled every space. They packed corridors and stairwells. Mothers held babies. Children sat on suitcases. Wounded soldiers lay on stretchers. Everyone was desperate to leave. They had walked for days through the snow to reach the port. The Gustloff left port at 12:30 p.m. The Baltic Sea was rough. Temperatures were below freezing. Ice formed on the decks. But at least they were moving. At 6 p.m., the ship turned on its navigation lights. This violated blackout procedures. But the captain wanted to avoid a collision with German minesweepers in the area. Soviet submarine S-13 was patrolling nearby. Commander Alexander Marinesko spotted the illuminated ship. He couldn't believe his luck. He ordered attack positions. The crew loaded torpedoes. They waited for the perfect angle. At 9:16 p.m., Marinesko fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 hit the Gustloff and killed hundreds of women and children sheltering there. The engine room explosion knocked out power. The ship listed immediately. Corridors became steep slopes. People fell and tumbled into darkness. The emergency lighting failed. Thousands were trapped below deck with no light, just the sound of rushing water. Panic spread through the ship. Stairwells became death traps. Bodies piled up as people tried climbing over each other. Parents lost their children in the chaos. The Gustloff sank in less than 45 minutes. Thousands were still trapped inside when it went under. Those who made it into the water had minutes before hypothermia set in. Only 9 lifeboats were successfully launched. Approximately 9,400 people died. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in history. The Lakonia Incident. On December 19, 1963, the TSMS Lakonia left Southampton, England, on a Christmas cruise to the Canary Islands. The Greek luxury liner was 608 feet long and carried 646 passengers and 376 crew. Most passengers were British tourists celebrating the holidays. They were looking forward to warm weather and relaxation. On December 22, 1963, the Lakonia was near Madeira. That evening, passengers dressed for dinner. The dining room was full. People ate and drank. The atmosphere was festive. It was exactly what they'd hoped for. Around 11 p.m., most passengers went to their cabins. Some stayed at the bar. Others walked on deck enjoying the warm night air. 25 minutes later, a fire broke out on the ship. An electrical wiring fault ignited chemicals and towels. The fire spread quickly. Flames climbed through wall panels. Smoke filled the corridors. A passenger smelled smoke and alerted crew members. They found the barber shop engulfed in flames. The crew grabbed fire extinguishers, but the fire was already too large. At 11:30 p.m., the fire alarm sounded. Passengers woke up confused. They opened their cabin doors and found smoke filling the hallways. The smoke was thick and black. Visibility dropped to 0. People tried finding their way to the deck, but the ship's layout was confusing. Corridors twisted in multiple directions. Stairwells filled with smoke. Some passengers crawled on hands and knees trying to find fresh air. The fire spread to the ship's wiring. Lights began failing. Sections of the ship went dark. People were trapped in darkness with smoke closing in. On deck, crew members tried launching lifeboats, but the fire had damaged the davit mechanisms. Some boats wouldn't release. Others dropped unevenly and spilled passengers into the ocean. The fire reached the dining room and the lounges. Flames engulfed furniture and wooden panels. Windows exploded from the heat. Passengers trapped in interior cabins faced impossible choices: stay and suffocate from smoke, or try running through burning corridors. Some were overcome by smoke before reaching the exits. Others suffered severe burns trying to escape. By midnight, the entire midsection of the ship was on fire. Rescue ships received distress calls. At 3:30 a.m., the Argentine ship Salta arrived first and began taking on survivors. Some passengers jumped into the ocean to escape the flames. The water was rough. People struggled to stay afloat. The fire burned for 3 days before the Lakonia finally sank. 128 people died. Most suffocated from smoke inhalation. Others burned to death trapped in their cabins. The MS Bulgaria Tragedy. On July 10, 2011, the MS Bulgaria left the port of Bulgar, Russia, on the Kuibyshev Reservoir. The river cruise ship was 262 feet long and carried 201 passengers and crew. Most were Russian tourists on a 2-day cruise. They were families with children, elderly couples, and groups of friends. The Bulgaria was 55 years old. The weather that morning looked threatening. Dark clouds gathered. The wind picked up, but the captain decided to continue. River cruises are rarely canceled for weather. Passengers settled into their activities. Children played on deck. Adults sat in the dining area drinking tea. The ship sailed through calm waters initially, but in the early afternoon, the weather worsened. Strong winds created waves on the reservoir. The Bulgaria began rocking. At 1:58 p.m., the ship suddenly listed to starboard. The list increased rapidly. Within seconds, the ship was tilting at 30 degrees. Tables and chairs slid across the floor. People fell and tumbled toward the starboard side. Water poured in through open portholes on the lower decks. The ship had been listing slightly to starboard all morning due to poor weight distribution. When strong winds hit, they pushed the ship over further. The ship tilted more. The elderly struggled to move on the steep angle. Some couldn't move at all. The captain tried turning the ship, but there wasn't enough time. Within 1 minute, the ship was on its side. Within 3 minutes, it was completely underwater. Most passengers never made it out. They were trapped in cabins and corridors as water rushed in. Parents held their children as water closed over them. Families drowned together. Those in interior cabins had no windows to break through. There was no escape. Some passengers on deck managed to jump into the water before the ship went under, but most couldn't swim. They struggled in the waves. People called for help, but there were no other boats nearby. Rescue boats arrived 30 minutes later. Out of 201 people on board, only 79 survived. 122 people died. Bodies were later recovered from inside the sunken wreck. Many were children still in their parents' arms. The Dongfang Incident. On June 1, 2015, the MV Dongfang Jixing sailed up the Yangtze River in China. The cruise ship was 251 feet long and carried 454 people. Most were elderly Chinese tourists on a multi-day river tour. They were retirees enjoying a vacation. The weather forecast warned of severe thunderstorms, but the captain continued sailing. By evening, the storm intensified. Heavy rain fell. Wind speeds increased. Passengers stayed inside their cabins. Some played cards in the dining room. Others went to bed early. Around 9 p.m., the ship was near Jianli County in Hubei Province. The storm reached its peak. Rain pounded the decks. The wind howled. Lightning flashed across the sky. The storm was much worse than predicted. At 9:28 p.m., a downburst struck the ship. This one hit with winds exceeding 80 miles per hour. The wind hit the ship's side like a wall. The Dongfang Jixing rolled immediately. Passengers were thrown across their cabins. Furniture crashed. The lights went out. Everything happened in seconds. The ship kept rolling. Within seconds, it was upside down. The entire vessel capsized in less than 1 minute. But passengers had no time to react. No time to grab life jackets. No time to reach the exits. No time to scream. Those in cabins faced impossible situations. They banged on the hull. Some could hear each other through the walls. The screaming and banging continued for minutes. Then silence. A few passengers near the exits managed to escape. Only 12 people made it out alive. By the time rescue boats arrived, the ship was completely capsized and sank in about 49 feet of deep water. Divers found passengers still strapped in their beds. Others were piled against doors they couldn't open. Entire families drowned in their cabins. 442 people died. Most drowned trapped inside the capsized ship. The vessel flipped so fast that almost no one had a chance to escape. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.